I was 17 when I first heard the guns of the Revolution. It was April of 1775, and though my family lived far from Lexington or Concord, word of the fighting traveled fast, faster than the riders who carried it. It came on the wind, in whispers at taverns, in the fierce new tone of my father's voice when he spoke of liberty. The colonies were awake, and the king's men had drawn blood. That was all I needed to know. My name is Thomas Hale, born in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, son of a cooper and a woman who feared God more than muskets. I'd been raised to mind my trade, to shape barrels and stay out of politics, but when men began drilling on the green, I felt something stir in me, something I had no name for then. It was pride and fear and the quiet certainty that I could no longer be a bystander to history. In the spring of '76, I left home with a musket older than I was, a sack of biscuits, and my mother's tears still damp on my collar. The Continental Army was forming, and rumor had it a Virginian, George Washington, had been named its commander. I'd never seen him, but I'd heard the name whispered like a prayer and shouted like a rallying cry. A man of dignity and discipline, they said, a soldier who stands straighter than any king. When I enlisted, I expected banners and songs. What I found were rags, hunger, and the smell of unwashed men. Our uniforms were mismatched, our powder scarce, our boots torn to leather ghosts. But for all that, I'd never felt prouder. The first battle I saw was Long Island, August of '76. It was chaos, fog, fire, men shouting in accents from every colony. I remember the flash of bayonets and the smell of wet earth. We fought, we fell back, we ran. Washington saved us that night, not by winning, but by retreating, crossing the East River under cover of darkness. Some called it cowardice. I called it grace. He had saved the army, and with it, the revolution. I did not see him close that night, but I saw his silhouette on horseback, calm amid the panic. It burned into my memory like a candle in fog. The winter that followed was merciless. We encamped in New Jersey near Morristown, where snow buried the earth and our rations dwindled to nothing. I saw men boil their shoes for broth. I saw others desert in the night, their footprints swallowed by the storm. But I also saw hope, flickering like a lantern in a barn window. Washington's men did not follow him because of pay or comfort. We followed because he believed when others did not. When the river froze, he saw a path. When the night was black, he saw an opportunity. It was Christmas of 1776 when he led us across the Delaware River. I remember the ice scraping the hull, the muffled curses, the sound of wind that felt like knives. I remember how he stood in the boat, silent, motionless, as though carved from marble. Some said he prayed. I believe he did. When we struck the Hessians at Trenton, it was over in minutes. The shock of it, the cannon fire echoing through the streets, the red of their coats against the snow, it felt like deliverance. Afterward, we wept like children, clutching one another, not for victory alone, but for survival, for proof that we were not mad to believe. 2 winters later came Valley Forge, the crucible of our souls. The snow was deeper, the hunger worse, and yet something changed in us there. We were no longer farmers with muskets, we were soldiers. We drilled under Baron von Steuben, a Prussian with a temper sharp enough to cut stone. He cursed in German, but we understood him well enough. He taught us how to stand, to march, to fight as one. When I looked around the camp, I saw not colonies, but a nation in the making. I wrote to my mother that winter. I told her not to worry, that our spirits were strong. The truth was, I feared I'd never see her again. Frostbite claimed fingers. Fever took men in their sleep. But each morning we rose, saluted the flag, and waited for orders. When Washington rode through camp, even the sick tried to stand. He looked at us not as rabble, but as brothers. He spoke little, but when he did, every man listened. "Gentlemen," he said once, "the fate of unborn millions will now depend, under God, on the courage and conduct of this army." His coat was dusted with powder, his face streaked with sweat. He was not the marble hero I'd imagined, but a man, tired, mortal, unyielding, and somehow that made me love him more. The war dragged on. We marched south, Savannah, Charleston, Camden, each name a dirge for lost comrades. The British burned towns, loyalists turned on neighbors, and disease did what muskets could not. By 1781, I was 23, a veteran of battles I barely remembered. My body was mapped with scars, yet the fire in me burned brighter than ever. Word came that the French had joined us and that Washington planned to strike Yorktown. Hope returned, cautious but alive. We marched for weeks through rain and dust, the drums of France beating beside our own. I walked beside men from Massachusetts, Carolina, and the islands of the Caribbean. For the first time, I felt we were not 13 colonies, but one cause, one people. When we reached Virginia, the air smelled of the sea and of destiny. Yorktown sat on the bluff above the York River, the British entrenched behind earthworks and cannon. We surrounded them like wolves. Night after night, we dug trenches closer to the enemy lines, the sound of shovels mingling with distant gunfire. Shells screamed overhead. The earth shook. I learned to sleep to the rhythm of bombardment. I'll never forget October 14th, 1781, the assault on Redoubt 10. It was our chance to break the line. The French took Redoubt 9. We took 10. Washington chose Alexander Hamilton to lead us. I was among the men in that column, crouched in the dark, bayonet fixed, musket unloaded to keep silence. When the signal came, we charged. The world became a blur of earth and flame. I vaulted the parapet, stabbed, shouted, clawed my way forward. The screams were human and inhuman at once. Within 10 minutes, it was over. We had taken the redoubt. I looked around and saw men embracing, bleeding, laughing like madmen. Above us, the stars and stripes rose against the burning sky. 2 days later, Cornwallis surrendered. The war, at least in that moment, was won. When word came that General Washington would review the troops, I felt my knees weaken. I'd fought 6 years under his command and had never spoken to him. Now, as we stood in ranks, the man himself rode before us. He was older than I expected, lines of care etched around his eyes, but his presence silenced the wind itself. He dismounted, walking the line, nodding to each regiment. When he reached ours, his gaze met mine for the briefest second. He said, "You've done your country honor." And then he smiled. That was all. No grand speech, no gesture. Yet in that moment, I would have followed him into hell itself. The months that followed were strange. Peace came slowly, like the thaw after a long winter. The British sailed away, and we soldiers, those who survived, faced a new question. What now? I returned to Virginia to find my father older, my mother frail. The shop was half collapsed, but there was laughter too and pride. People spoke of liberty as if it were a living thing. Still, the nights were long. I'd wake to the echo of drums or the phantom scent of powder. I missed the comrades who'd fallen, their faces flickering through my dreams. War had forged me, but it had also hollowed me out. Sometimes I'd ride past a field at dawn and remember Valley Forge, the way frost sparkled like bayonets. Other times, I'd hear a rooster and think of Trenton, of that river crossing and the man who dared the impossible. They called him the father of our country. To me, he was something more. Proof that greatness can be born not from blood or crown, but from conviction. It's been years since Yorktown, and the scars have faded, but the memories never will. When I close my eyes, I still see Washington standing on that ridge, the sun at his back, watching as the British drums beat the march of surrender. He did not gloat, he did not smile, he simply bowed his head. That's how I'll always remember him, not as a statue or a name in marble, but as the man who carried our fragile hope through the darkest of winters and never let it die. They say revolutions are won by ideas. Maybe so, but I know they are carried on the backs of ordinary men who dared to believe in something greater than themselves. And we believed. Years later, when I heard Washington had refused a crown and chosen to retire to his farm at Mount Vernon, I wept. Not because the war was over, but because I finally understood. He had not fought for power. He had fought for us, to give us the right to be more than subjects, to be citizens. Every generation since has lived in the shadow of that gift. Sometimes, when the night is quiet, I take out my old uniform. The buttons are tarnished, the fabric thin, but when I hold it, I feel young again. I hear the drums, the shouts, the crack of muskets, and I remember the boy who left home with nothing but a dream and returned a citizen of a new world. Freedom was not given to us. We earned it, one battle, one winner, one heartbreak at a time. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the cost of liberty is eternal vigilance and gratitude. If this story moved you, if you felt even a spark of what we fought for, don't let it fade. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more stories of the men and women who built a nation from the ashes of empire. Freedom lives when we remember.